And with that, I'm going to actually hand over the mic, well, the clicker, really, to Jürgen Alger of YouTube to talk about testing on the tube.
Whoever designed this needs to hand out, boy, there's an echo too. Not only do I need sunglasses, I need to get used to my new voice here. Good morning, everyone. Jürgen Alger, that's me. I run the test group in YouTube. And over the next, what's left, 50 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of what challenges we tackled over the last years and our success story, at least a few of them. I joined Google 8 years ago with a job to build up the engineering productivity function in Europe. Probably most of you have heard about engineering productivity in Google. It's an umbrella function for lots of disciplines all around testing, automation in general, speeding things up, from speed up the compilers all the way up to building tools to help find maybe those bugs that take 2 weeks to find manually. When I heard about this idea of building an organization really only focused on that, I was very intrigued, applied for the job, got the job, moved to Zurich in Switzerland, and for the next 3 years started to build up this group. And then I got a repeat offer to do the same thing for YouTube about three and a half years ago. And again, it was pretty interesting to see, okay, for coming from the world of trying to do this operation across all of the different product groups within Google that happened to be in Europe, in one of the Europe offices, kind of pivot around to say, okay, wherever a YouTube team works, which is Zurich here, San Bruno in California, Mountain View, of course, the home base, LA, Paris. Wherever we have people in YouTube, I helped build up this organization that hopefully helps us to get YouTube and the operations behind it clicking on all cylinders. So what I'm going to do in the next time here, in the next hour, is to lead you through a couple of those challenges that we were facing. But let me first give you a bit of an introduction into what this system under test we're going to talk about actually looks like. Yes, we're going to talk about YouTube and pretty much only about YouTube. So I will not mention a lot of other of the product areas and tools built there. I'll just give you the story of the smaller scope. As it's not really surprising, being a video service, a lot of the stack is built up with proper video services, how to upload, how to transform, how to get all the different formats in, how to stream out, how to distribute over the data centers, et cetera, et cetera. On top of that, we have a set of very unique features that differentiate YouTube from the other services that are out there. When I joined, we had our main site, youtube.com, and we're just starting to build the main YouTube app for Android and iPhone. But over time, in the last 3 years, this has changed as well. There's many more apps. We call them verticals that we talk about a bit more. And of course, we have all the platform metrics, right? So for the main site, all the browser combinations you are well familiar with. And then with the apps, then we got a lot of interesting platforms that are not in the typical mix. So YouTube runs on TVs, on set-top boxes, on PlayStations, right? So unfortunately, in some of those, we are not as far along in automation terms. And I really would want to reach out to you, anyone familiar with that type of problems and working on that, please reach out to me after this. I'm really interested to learn about how to automate on a TV, for example. One step deeper into the details, as I said, video service, so we are concerned with getting your videos up, be that from the desktop or from mobile. We started streaming live from game stations, where the gamers can stream up live. We have live streaming. You might remember the big Olympics streaming through YouTube a few years ago. So we get the stuff in, lots and lots of pixels and bytes. We start processing. The processing typically happens within 3 minutes, and in that time, we get the formats converted. We are still in the mode of pre-converting, so we convert and upload so that when you request the video, we are actually ready to serve out the format that you need. We store it, obviously, and distribute it through the centers. Later on, the streaming component helps to get all of these previously generated formats out in the various platforms and device formats. You probably heard about our adaptive streaming, where depending on the network speed and the quality of the network you're on, you might change the resolution and the quality of the stream that comes in so that you on the device get the best possible experience without seeing the spinner too much, hopefully. So around all this, on top of that, we have some very special things that not everyone knows about or recognizes right away when you hear YouTube. The biggest unique differentiator between YouTube as a video platform and most of the others is that we have this feature called Content ID, a way to allow creators to protect their content on YouTube by using or utilizing the information about the copyrights they already have. Right? So you upload your video, you do something we call claim, so you call out that this is yours and you don't want to share this with anyone, and that any usage rights you should be in control of, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting part of this is that these copyright rights are handed out by territories. So meaning if you own a video that has 4 or 5 copyrights for lyrics and live performance and digital streaming, et cetera, et cetera. If you have those, say, in the US, it's not necessarily true that you also have those in other countries. If you travel a lot and you use YouTube while you're traveling, you may have seen this video not available in whatever country you happen to be in, although you just yesterday watched it before you entered the plane, right? And this is why. So the owner of the video has managed to get the copyright in the US, has not managed to get it somewhere else. But overall, the content is protected. So when we look at this and try to stream this, we say, OK, until this is resolved, sorry, we can't help you on. So that is, I think, the biggest differentiator to others, and brings a lot of people that create content, like musicians, artists, to stick with our platform. Next to that, we have a social components. You can comment on the videos. You can interact with your fans, for example, if you're a musician. And it's a pretty high traffic social component in that. You have personalization. You may have recognized that you get recommended videos. If you watch a certain set of videos, you get others that you think you might be interested in. That is based on a personalization engine that learns from your behavior. We have one of the larger search components that are out there. When I checked this beginning of the year, we were number 2, so we're still probably pretty high up there. The search is obviously optimized for video media. So if you put the same search into google.com and into youtube.com, you will get different results. Because in our site, you get videos and not news reports and other things. Right? I mentioned the platforms we're on. It's pretty much anywhere you can think of, with some trouble spots, like I mentioned the TVs and set-top boxes. A variety of browsers, a variety of versions of Android. You may have heard that we have more than one out there. A bit fewer on iOS, but still a variety there as well. So we have the usual matrix of testing and compatibility There's also an aspect, and we move on to really the user interface, the client side. There is the challenge to keep in sync those clients with all the changes that happen on the mid-tier that are pushed on a pretty frequent basis, etc. We started out with just browser, as I mentioned, and by now we not only have what was on the browser before on the mobile platforms in our YouTube app, but we also diversified and have now more apps next to each other, right? We call them the verticals. One vertical that was pretty popular through this year was music. We launched a music app where you get an optimized access through the interface, optimized access to the subset of the corpus that is music related. We have a special app for kids that has a very unique UI. If you ever looked at this, it's very different. Obviously targeted for kids, for young people. A lot of parental control in that. A lot of restrictions, a lot of scrutiny. Just recently we launched our gaming app that again has the same idea, right? Just provide a very unique access to a subset of the corpus, and the gamers seem to love it. So, talking a bit about what this engine actually does, what this machine actually does. If you have right now, we're looking at about 300 hours of uploads per minute. So all of these now in a huge amount coming from mobile. All of these videos come in about a dozen formats. We transpose them, we store them, etc. We have acquired quite a bit of corpus by now. It's in the billions of videos, and of course there's this, if you say, the talk of the long tail, if you say users over how many videos they actually upload, right? There's only a few that have thousands of them. And then there's lots and lots who have 1 or 2 or 3. Some of them uploaded, never watched, but still, they're in the corpus. We store them, we replicate them, we move them. Lots of fun. Streaming, you've heard maybe about some of the highlights. We had the Olympics a few years ago. We had the space jump. That was our peak outbound stream of several terabytes per second. So we have lots of users that use consume the media. We bridged the 50% mark, or we stepped over the 50% mark of mobile usage, something I personally couldn't imagine to happen. But we have half of the traffic now coming from mobile devices, right? So half of all videos are watched and consumed not on the desktop. What also is interesting is that kind of a little subsystem that's humming up there is that as you go to the site and you see the videos, you always get these little thumbnails next to the videos, right? Which is basically an image server that serves about 2 million images per second. Just noteworthy, I thought. I talked a bit about the content system. So we have lots of people who use that. We call them our partners. More than 8,000 individuals or groups that make use of that, make quite a bit of money with that. And we paid out, this is a number of last year, we paid out over $1 billion to those owners and rights holders. So this is the system I'm living in. And what we are going to talk about a bit in the next half hour probably is some of the things that I ran in the last 3 years and that we tackled and actually solved. Or let's say some of them we are still in the phase of solving them, in the process of solving them. I don't think any of these you're not familiar with. You've all heard those. Everyone has their own solutions to this. I hope this will be some insight in this. The first topic is what do you do in an area where your launches are just not clicking along the clock as you want them to? Right? Some take longer, some go okay, but you can't really for sure predict, okay, tomorrow or in 3 days or whatever your schedule is, that you will actually hit the clock and your launch is ready. The second is a bit about our mobile device landscape. I mentioned that already, so a bit more detail there. And the third one is not a technical or tooling question, although we also try to solve this in a tool-based approach. How do you change a team's development culture from very fast, almost startup-like, into a more mature, process-oriented, quality-oriented team without losing the speed and iteration speed that you have in the startup phase? All right, up first. So here we were a few years ago having a very simple idea, or at least an idea that sounded pretty simple on paper. After we upload and the initial store of the video that you send us, we create lots and lots of formats, and then we store it. And I already mentioned some of them are never watched, right? So pretty straightforward idea is to say, well, why don't we transform them when we stream them? And we know actually at least there's at least one request for it, right? And then we start transforming, and then we start storing, and we go on from there. We could save probably lots of storage space. We could probably space lots of processing time during upload, so your video might be ready earlier. Sounded like there's not that many negative points to this, negative things to this. So we came up with an idea that we call on-the-fly transcoding, which means exactly that. On request, you start, and then you stream out. Lots of changes, some really video-specific technical challenges. But what I want to talk about is this. Don't worry, there's no test on this. Just trying to give you an idea of a system that has lots of components, some dependencies in between them, nothing new. What made it hard was these components were distributed over a set of offices. And you see these little lines showing through the boxes. So there were dependencies between components owned in different sites. So communication was a problem. Complete independence of ownership of the component was a bit of a problem. That was one dimension. The second dimension was when we looked at how these components are actually built and made ready to launch, so how the corresponding binaries were created, we found a picture that, again, had, some locally at least contained releases, but there's more than one, which means, again, now you see the lines between the release binaries. We have dependencies on not only content, but now also on schedule, right? So when our front end wants to push, and the mid-tier, the storage, say, is not quite ready, then what do we do, right? No surprise in what that resulted in, right? Everyone has seen these pictures. We start coding. We get a release finally ready and put it in an area where others can access it, right? So the other guy comes in, puts in his code, starts to bring it together, and didn't think of that. Okay, have to go back. While I'm going back and do some fixes, the third component comes in, right? So we're getting through the typical waterfall model of building large systems, right? And I think there's one more explosion there, yeah. This is when we wanted to launch, or a few days after, right? So everyone has seen these pictures, right? The problem was, okay, how do we do this, right? We have the need, obviously, for something that can be used in all the environments that we use in development. So that is my own workstation, kind of my local development environment. That is any staging, testing environment that we build up, where others are already participating, or I build up. And obviously, finally, it has to work in real life, what we call Borg out there. We wanted to make sure that each individual environment is hermetic and has no dependencies on others, right? So that was the biggest problem. We wanted to be able to build it from head, so no delays. Whatever current code is should be moved forward. We wanted 0 runtime dependencies. We also wanted to make sure to take care of one area of one source of problems we ran into quite a bit is when we moved from our staging areas into the production area. There was a short, small configuration file that described exactly how the different servers and the different CPUs were configured and what priorities they have, etc., for live production, right? And in way too many cases, we got into a problem where everything worked fine on staging, right? But essentially, no one believed that we were really done until we observed the same behavior really in live, because there were some not quite sure how we mapped this, right? So when we started out, we said, let's try and get rid of that problem, get rid of that insecurity. Let's let's see if we can build a system that is able to look exactly the same in our test environment, at least in the larger ones. And then when we swap over, we do not touch the configuration. 1 second. And of course, you know, coming from where we're coming from, we wanted this to be test-oriented, right? So we wanted to be consistently designed for testability from the get-go. After almost 2 years where we created this system, what we have right now really is a system where all these various boxes that I had on the initial pictures, that's about 200 different services owned by different groups. Some of them in YouTube, some of them in Google, that we make use of. We have one environment where we actually can develop and test all of these components together. A nice side effect was that the engineers are now so involved in working on this system that there is really not that big a difference anymore between developing and testing, right? And it was almost a side effect. This was we said yes, we wanted the system to be to be targeted for testability, wanted to be easy to be tested on, but the way it looks right now is working in this environment is equals to testing, which is great. Also, there is no separate integration phase anymore, right? As soon as you commit your code, it's deployed in this infrastructure, and you live in that big system, right? So we save the whole stack. And we actually hit the no surprise objective that we set ourselves to say, when we switch over, we don't have to care. We use exactly the configuration from the live system. If you remember the little explosion chart I had before, right? So we had a honestly unpredictable release calendar, right? Because of so many dependencies, we were basically continuously pushing, right? Whenever something was ready, we started. Whenever the push was ready, we started over with the next one and worked our way through. And we went up to sometimes 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks in really bad cases. And what we got today is a system where we have nightly builds that are ready for consumption if we choose to do so. And the main reason for this is really point 2 and 3, right? There is almost no difference between development environment and test environment. And whenever you're done developing, you also know that it's actually working and we can push this out. So we are on a mostly daily. We don't hit every day, but most of the days we got a successful build. Not that is pushed necessarily into live every day, but it is something ready, which has the usual positive impact consequences, right? Small deltas in code changes from day to day. If something comes up, there is a small scope to look for bugs, etc. All the well-known things. So that was we were pretty happy about that, and still working now to get this completely 100% for all the 200 plus services. A few stragglers are out there, take a bit longer, but we plan to have this really ready and available. So that was pretty happy, and a pretty happy story, and it took us about 2 years to get through this, right? To build this whole infrastructure into which to dump these components. But well worth it, because now, you know, it's unbelievable the amount of time everyone saves by not going to wait for something or to look in a pile of code that is old for changes that may or may not impact the current thing. Sorry. On to the next topic. Mobile. So if you recall, we have this quote-unquote matrix that I have to care about on the client tier, right? While the mid-tier and the backends are pretty well moving on a daily click with new pushes for the live side. If you look at the set of apps that we now have, it's a slightly different story. One, we have to make sure that any of the mid-tier and backend changes keep alive all the variants we have out there, right? So on the browser side, that's easy because we push that as a whole stack and they're in sync by definition. But for Android apps, iPhone apps, for the TV apps where we have no control of when they're actually shipped out, for Xbox or PS2, they have really long development cycles, or launch cycles, rather. We have to make sure that whatever we shipped half a year ago is still working with tomorrow's update of the live site. And that brings with it a whole new dimension of test matrix, if you want, right? We call it compatibility of what's out there to what will be available tomorrow in the servers. The way we tackled that was like this. So here is a stack of various development and or test environments, including the production system. Most of them we have in multiple variants. And the challenge was how to get the apps platforms connected to these integration environments or test environments on a not manual and not necessarily hardware device base, right? Ideally, you don't want just we have maybe 200 developers in that group running around with 10 devices each to figure out what works and what not. So what we did, the usual approach, two parts, right? We have a hardware lab that has a few hundred devices that are centrally managed, upgraded, kept up and running, that you can, as a developer, can log into and exercise your test or see your change. And they can connect to one or more of those development environments or test environments. Next to that, so these are as close as taking a tablet and start tapping, right? Next to that, we have the emulator set for, at least for those where we have emulators. So for Android, iOS, we have machines who do exactly the same, and that's mainly the basis for all of the automated tests. And then what we are still working on, made a bit of progress, but have quite a big spot on the map to still cover, is what I here call the dedicated hardware for, call them non-standard devices, right? So TVs, for example, is hard because I haven't found a good answer to automate on a TV for some Linux derivative that is reproducible. Sure, you could automate it, right? It's a huge effort, but then what do you do with the next TV? And the TVs seem to pop up every holiday season, like. So, open question. We have one where for the subset of all the devices where we have to run that have a video out card, where we intercept that and do comparison, golden snapshot comparison. That works pretty well. Brought us to the point where, for example, for HTML5 browsers on TVs, we can, for every of the daily builds, we run a smoke test that does this, right? And although Xbox is kind of the same story underneath, Xbox has a extremely long launch cycle, right? So we have said before, well, okay, we care about all of this when it comes more closer to the holidays, right? When there's an update. But in January, February, March, no one really cared about this yet. Where we are now is that with every cycle of the backend, we create the corresponding build, and we have, through these dedicated hardware setups, some way to smoke test those and say at least everything is still running with the version we shipped, which is nice. But as I said, this is a topic I'm really interested in talking to some of you, hopefully. All right, and then lastly, so no, this is a summary of where we got here. All platforms, including those weird ones, we have found a way to validate at least the every daily push. So at least we know we're not breaking. Have automated smoke fest from those. And because we now have the automation platforms, the amount of testing that was manual was reduced dramatically, right? And I'm not an advocate for not having, not too many nods. I'm an advocate for having manual tests, right? Too many negations. I'm an advocate for having manual testing, but it should be exploratory testing, not scripted regression tests, right? So I don't want to spend every day when I create a new driver X numbers of hours to just make sure everything works, right? I want to spend that effort and energy on the new features that we develop to make sure they're okay. And with the platforms we have now, we were able, and we get a bit more of that later, we were able to cut the amount of manual tests needed on those devices to 50%, while compared to a year ago, while we were adding 3 different apps. So it was pretty dramatic reduction. The last topic I want to talk a bit about is what I here call the cultural change. So with all this automation, so step back. 3 or 4 years ago, when we talked about testing in YouTube, it was a huge amount of manual work, right? Even when we had only the live site, the site, the browser-based clients, it was a huge amount of manual testing. We did unit tests, yes. We did some integration tests, but then most of the bulk was end-to-end, and most of the end-to-end was done manually. So one question is, as you introduce these platforms, you also want to introduce a culture where everyone knows these platforms and knows what to do of them, and it's as easy as possible for someone to pick those up and learn that, so that every developer actually has a easy way to get to the platforms and do the job, the testing job. So as an organization, we decided, okay, quality is a thing now. We need to somehow get to a better level of where we are. We want to reduce manual, but we also at the same time do not want to increase bugs, obviously, right? Rather reduce them. So we looked at where we are, and this is about 18 months ago or so, when we really set, 18 months ago, where we really set out to do this. And we took a snapshot of where are we today, right? Number of P0, P1 bugs out in live. How many do we find in the staging process? How many do we find here? The typical analysis, go there. We looked at it, came up with metrics of what are we actually want to look at on a consistent basis, and what SLAs are we setting ourselves? What's our goal, right? If we now have 20 P0s happening in a week, is that bad? Is that good? What do we want to do about it? What's the new goal? And we started pretty simple by saying wherever we are, we cut everything in half within 2 quarters, right? See where we come with this. Have to have a goal. So we set the SLAs. The next problem then was, how do we talk about these? How does everyone know where we are, and specifically where the team is that I'm part of, right? Am I doing okay? Am I improving? Am I slacking? What? So we wanted, we thought that in order to get these goals right, we need a tool that allows us to look at our metrics across the board and be able to drill up and to drill down go as big scope as you want, or as granular as you want, and say, okay, the organization itself does like this team is doing here, and find out, who's doing well, where can we learn, how can we transfer best practices. We also thought about the different types of what quality could mean, right? There is obviously the product quality, right? Does the product do what it wants? Is it easy to navigate? Is it responsive? Is it intuitive? If you click here, this will happen. Especially if we went out to the to the platforms where the UI is so far away from what we were used to in the browser world. Right? If you look at a TV or the Kids app as an extreme, right? You have very different UI methodologies, and we wanted to have a statement on that level. Okay, are we okay? Where do we not as good as we think we should? The second topic was operations. So how are we with development excellence, if you want? Right? If the first is product excellence, the second one was developer excellence. How many bugs do we have? Where do we find them? How is our coverage? How many manual tests does it still need? That was my favorite, right? Do we still have manual stuff in regression happening, and where, and why is it not moving, right? And then the last test that was more specific for the test organization, to go after, are we doing the right things to help the larger organization to do their job? Right? And quite obviously, out of all this, we wanted to have automation wherever possible. It's pretty obvious that when we talk about this, everyone thinks of test automation. But there's lots and lots of other areas where automation helps, right? So if you think about the push process itself, how we release a product, we had lots of manual steps in between that slowed things down, were natural sync points, but also single points of failure if something didn't work out, right? So across the board, look for opportunities to automate, and one by one, take them down. My personal favorite goal, no manual regression. Not quite there yet, but we made some headways there. I already mentioned the goals. Was a bit ahead of myself here. So we picked where we were, we cut it in half, we said go, and then we tracked. And the tracking is, I think, more important than the actual goal, because you can also always reset the goal when you get closer and you think you should still improve, right? Then we mapped this back to, you probably heard about the OKRs in Google, so the commitment of every individual to the team. Okay, I'm going to do this, and we set kind of both downstream and from bottoms up objectives for the quarter, and these were kind of enforced objectives for the teams. You have to have this state in the metrics that we give you from the top, right? And those were the typical, okay, no P0s in production and kind of the obvious things. But we built the tool in a way that the teams themselves could come up and say, well, I have something that is really important to me for my interpretation of what quality means for my subset of the system that no one else really cares about, right? But for me, it's important, so we allowed this to be incorporated. And finally, we had also to do some work on who we had on board. That's specifically for me, right? I had a team mix 3 years ago that is dramatically different from what we have now, right? Now we have much more software engineer types who can actually build the tools and help automation and understand the systems, and less core test engineers concerned about larger system consistency test plans and things like that. We still have them, we still need them. My problem was I didn't have the other as well, right? So we built that up and now have a mix that is better equipped to tackle this. The most used, can't remember the American phrase, the tool that was most useful in this, that we used to get to change in the larger organization was this. You don't have time for manual, right? And because of that, you have to think about how to automate and what to automate, and let everyone else know what you need to do that so we can help you get there. So we said, okay, 3 years ago, on the main side even, we had every few weeks we had a push, and we said, okay, we go to daily builds, to daily launches, daily pushes every day. And if you think from 3 weeks down to 1 day, there's a lot of time you don't have anymore to do all kinds of things. Or you have to stop doing all kinds of things. This was the single most important decision we made from an organization to get to that. And this is kind of a current snapshot of where we are. You can see top left, the little downtrend. That's the amount of manual regression tests we still have in the system. We're about 34.5%, so about a third of all the tests that, so we classified our tests as, okay, here are P0 tests that we call them, that have to run on each release before we say we can go, right? And 2/3 of those are now automated. And as I said, keep in mind which platforms we talk about. In some, I have no idea of how to ever get really down, right? And we added a couple of interfaces and apps. So I'm pretty proud of the takedown, but obviously not complete yet. Unit tests we kept pretty stable, which is also good because of, again, of these new verticals that we launched, right? The standard, the default discussion at every point when the decision is made that an additional app will be launched is, oh, we have to go to market tomorrow, we don't have time for anything, right? And by experience, right, everyone knows that too, the first thing that gets cut back is work on automation, right? I'll do this when we launched, I don't know how the system looks like, how the interface looks like, I don't want to spend any cycles on this quite yet, I'll do this later, right? So looking at a coverage curve that stayed flat over those additional new verticals is, I think, a pretty good result out of this. And on the right side is our current snapshot over the last, how far back does this go? About a year, I think, yeah. About a year back on our release plans, right? So we set out that we want daily pushes, we want daily launches. And so this shows how often we hit. So daily in our world means 4, actually. We have a 4-day week. We didn't want to push on Fridays because we didn't want people to work on Saturday and Sunday to fix the bugs that we introduced Friday, potentially, right? So we said, okay, we want to go Monday through Thursday. And so we have a target of 4 per week. And here you see that we get 3.5 out of that most of the times. There are some weeks that have holidays in them where we didn't need 4 really. And as I said before, this, in my mind, was the best decision we ever made to push for this, right? Because that squeezed everyone's allowance for what can happen. We have right now a honest test window on the release level of 3-4 hours, where testers actually go and manually do something. And even that on the apps we have reduced to exploratory. So they're not going through scripted tests, but they spend this time to just say, okay, you know the app, you know what should work, let me know whether you think we are good to go or whether something is off. What remains was the question of how to talk about this, right? How do you let the organization know how we're doing, and how do you find out where we're not doing so well and we should refocus and change things that are not working. So it's an eye chart. You're not supposed to read this. Just give you an overview. This is how the tracking site looks like, right? So this is an organizational chart if you want. You have YouTube as the top organization, and then you go through the different, you call them functional areas and investment areas and teams. So we picked 3 levels down, split the world up into a tree of depth 3, projected it, and said, okay, so here's who we look at. And then we track for everyone a mix of a fixed set of matrices that are pre-described and you can't opt out of, and a arbitrary long list of matrices that team-specific we use to say, okay, for the video delivery team, they have a few matrices that the Android app doesn't really care about, right? Okay, you put it in, you leave it out, fine. But once you put it in, you'll be tracked, right? And then you can drill down, and you get a slightly different view of the various aspects and dimensions we have. I mentioned before, we look at product, we look at release, we look at test. And further down, this is the lowest level, my group actually to go and say, okay, how are we doing? Oh, we had some production bugs in P1. This is probably this tool we're talking about that had a bug. And you see kind of very easily where are hotspots, where did we not meet the SLAs. We still think in 6 weeks sprints. So this little bar chart you see up top gives you the history of the last 8 or 9 6-week sprints next to each other. So you also get a trend, whether you're actually improving or you're degrading. You keep your level. You see pretty quickly where you should be concerned about and where you're doing fine. And then the next step, obviously, after that is to think about ongoing improvement of this. But what we got out of this is now a vocabulary to talk about quality in this organization that everyone understands, everyone knows where to go and look. Right? All these matrices we defined, even if it's in a team that is next to you, you learn a bit about what they care about. It is transparent. Everyone can look at this. There's a bit of public shaming going on, obviously. Right? You don't want to be the one red spot in a long list of green, all positive things. And mapping this down to the teams allowed also to have it very easy to know who to talk to about a problem. Right? It's this team, and I don't care which component in the code and blah, blah, blah. You do this yourself. Right? This team shows up as red or as declining. We need to talk. You do something about it. It's really cool. And what's left here? So we want to think about how do we, if we are at green, and some of those have some history where there's 3, 4, 5 sprints on green, what does that mean? Right? Does that mean we're done? Or does that mean we should look at the goal we set and whether we can improve that? Right? There is an ongoing discussion, especially with the aforementioned fast-to-market needs of teams, right? Which is a reality. When I look at our gaming app, we wanted the gaming app out there as fast as possible. But the question is, what is as possible? What does that really mean, right? What are you willing to jeopardize in order to get there? And obviously, in the way of getting out there as fast as possible is all the process, I would call this process work around it, to actually keep everyone from running too fast and introducing too many problems. Right? So that's an ongoing discussion that, on the plus side, actually is on the surface. Right? It's not some hidden, just one team has this problem. It's on the surface because we probably see a lot of red area in this, of red color in these areas, and we are forced to think about what we do. Another slightly hot topic in the existing culture is how far you go with asking people to do things a certain way. Right? We typically try to stay way back from that statement. Right? You can choose your tools, you can choose your development process, you can sprint or scrum or do whatever you want, as long as you deliver, right? But we are now at a point where we start seeing teams who do really well and can see the positive trends and impact on that, and think about whether we want to turn this around and not say, okay, you can use this or this or this tool, but to prescribe one tool set across a larger part of the organization. And if you're not in that, you need to have really good reasons. Right? But you're not quite there yet. It's on the table. My biggest problem, we still have platforms that are hard to automate that we haven't cracked, that I'm just without a good solution. We are almost on push every day, every work day, or every push day. So pretty consistent for probably 80% of the code base or the component set. And we're now starting to think if and how we push this forward, right? So daily, should we have 2 a day? Should we have 4 a day? What's the right number? Should we push every time code is ready? That we call push on green, right? Code, you submit your code, it goes through all kinds of tests, and at the end of that process, you're live, right? How far on that dimension do we want to push? Not quite obvious. Team identity cross. Let's talk about my other big problem of getting the right people for this type of work, right? Which I found rather harder than I expected. Hiring is a real struggle, both in terms of numbers and in terms of the right skill level, or the level and skill set. People who are really passionate about this topic of not working on the front, look, mom, I built a new app, but more in the back office. This room is probably more, it's much more easier to convince people here to do this type of work, but if you go to the general SWE software developer population, they're hard to find, very valuable and hard to find. Now I remember what this other bullet was. Another organizational problem on the team is, if you recall, I try to give a flavor of how diverse and how broad the technologies are, the set of technology is that is used to build this YouTube offering, right? And almost in every area of technology, there is a specialty for how do you actually validate this and make sure you have improved, right? So you think about machine learning and model-based testing as one example. You go down and you have hardcore video image processing things, right? You go up to the apps and you have UI, human-computer interaction topics, right? So it's a broad set, it's a broad spectrum, and we have not that many people. So most of them are specialized in some of those areas, right? And that's what I meant here with the team identity. How do you make these 100 people that do this feel as one team that solves this problem for YouTube versus, oh, I'm in the search group, and I'm in the personalization group, and I do this other thing, right? That is, ongoing struggle. And then the hiring. So, thanks for your time. I hope it was a bit interesting. I try to not get into too much of this is the tool we use and this is the language we do it in, right? But more on a higher level to see whether we can have some discussion. I'm here for the next 2 days. Very eager to talk to you guys about how can we do this better, what are your experiences. So take it as one of those experience drops in the back and see what it can do for you. With that, thank you. Not sure how we're doing in time. Do we have time for questions?
We are good for questions.
Excellent. Will this show me the
In theory.
the online? Okay,
Because it wasn't showing up on my phone.
there we go.
Can you click so it's showing the top tab, please?
You moderate, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a -1. What does that mean? Don't ask that question.
Oh yeah. Apparently, I'm not allowed to ask you that. I feel like I want to.
I
though.
didn't know you had
It's that red button. Could you describe the transition to a test environment that matches production?
I'll try. So the problem was that in our production system, the configuration information is stored in config files, right? The old Linux tradition. So we have information about which data centers to deploy to, how many CPUs, what priority level of these CPUs, who talks to whom, what is the backup philosophy, etc. So there's a lengthy description of all these configuration flags and what values, etc. Typically, in your development environment, you don't have or need that detail, right? So if you ignore that and just think about the development environment, you probably also come up with some configuration, but it doesn't have all the intricacies, and especially not all the tuning part that we have in the live world, right? So the problem was that you basically have two different system configuration descriptions, right? And while you know in your development environment everything works fine, there was a pretty good level of uncertainty about what happens if I deploy into this one with this set of configurations, to say, you know, we don't have to redo all our testing again. That's where we started out, right? We were done here, and then we deployed, and as we slowly rolled out, we rerun lots of our tests just to make sure, quote unquote. It's a quote, just to make sure, right? And what we now have done is to start out with the configuration files of the live system. Use that as input to the development system, right? Ignore what can be ignored, really that we don't care about, but make sure all the rest is exactly set like it is in live, right? Even if it's overkill and even if it's too much and we don't need this, who cares, right? It makes the step from one to the other so much less error prone. So that was the problem I tried to describe. Sorry if I wasn't too clear on that.
If you accomplish the goal of having no manual regression, how will you validate the look and feel?
So I think I mentioned that as well. I don't want the regression, the manual regression, to be scripted, first of all, right? So we do right now allow a time window of these 3 hours that we have when the new level is ready and it's start really to get rolled out. We use that for free-form testing, right? For exploratory testing. What I don't want is to say, oh, I have these scripts, and these hundreds of scripts have to go through, and the only way to scale this is to get more bodies in front of keyboards, right? That's what I don't want. I want these scripts to be in the other world where they're run automatically, so that exactly this can happen in the time we have. You shouldn't worry about, okay, does this result in that, right? You should worry about, does it look right? Did we break some of the usual things in internationalization, and right? Does it look right? Is the integration of the new feature into yesterday's system actually looking out there as it should? Things like that. So it's exactly that, I think, that I want. No manual scripted regression, but use the time for exploratory.
And I will tell people in the local audience, I am primarily taking questions off of the website. So if you want to ask one, feel free to add yours there too. This one might be hard to answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I think we should have.
know the answer.
I think we should have a conference on tools.
Yeah, what tools
How
do
about
we
that?
use, Jürgen? Can I share some of yours? Well, we can share, but can we share it with these guys, what tools we use?
So we could share. Usually what is behind the question is, can I use that too, right? And this is where it gets a bit tricky, because a lot of our tools are specially made for the whole proprietary stack that we built. So it starts, everyone knows that too, it starts with a low-level, slightly tuned Linux system that has its own compiler and its own, and then you walk up the tree, and if once you get to the test environments, a lot of them are very, very finely integrated with 25 other systems. Although, on the other hand, we have a few that we open sourced. WebDriver has been a very prominent one. There are some, but I honestly don't know. I mean, if you have maybe a list of 25 to 30 different tools that make up our environment, if it's 25, 23 of those are not really reusable outside.
And one of them is Google Drive for sharing test documents.
That is true, yeah. But not in spreadsheets anymore, right?
No test case management in spreadsheets.
You don't do that anymore. But maybe also want to mention that one of our big work, our Google big work items since a few quarters, is to bring a lot of these development tools and testing tools out into the cloud for developers to use and share, right? So while right now the only path for us really is to go through the work to open source something that we use if you think it's really can be abstracted away and still is useful, right, by itself. To say, forget this, a whole different approach. Here's a stack of tools to use if you develop on this platform. Then you get all these tools for free, build tools, integration tools, rollout to deploy, blah, 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 blah. Including the platforms to run the tests on, right? So including emulators for Android platforms, or even labs that run real physical machines that you can, as a developer, reach. That's still a bit out there, I hear. Maybe another week or two, right? But it's coming.
Become friends with the Google Cloud Tester and find out what you can about what is currently available in that space. Thank you, Jürgen.
All right. I'm around. And really would appreciate you reaching out. The clicker, of course. Thank you.
He keeps trying to steal my clicker.